There's something I've been noticing that honestly bothers me more the longer I think about it. I keep seeing the phrase, Gen Z will own nothing and be happy. And as someone who was born in 2000, I technically classify as Gen Z. And at first, I thought it was just another internet meme or kind of just something to grab your attention. But the more I look at how our generation actually lives, the subscriptions, the rent, the debt, the buy now, pay later payments, the more it stops feeling like a joke and it starts feeling like a business model for companies to profit off of our generation and our lives. So, in this video, I want to walk you through what's actually happening and why everything is moving toward renting instead of owning, and what we can actually do about it instead of just saying, well, I guess I'll just rent my whole life and hope I'm happy. So, to really get into this, let's start with something super basic. How many things in your life do you think you have, but you don't really own? Music? You don't own any of those albums. You rent them from Spotify or Apple. Movies and shows? You don't own any of those. They live on Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, and they can disappear at any time. Your design tools, your note taking apps, your cloud storage, even some video games, they're all subscription based. And it doesn't stop at digital stuff. There are subscriptions for clothes, furniture, rent your couch services, car subscriptions where you pay monthly instead of owning. Even razor blades and snacks are on a monthly subscription box. We've taken stuff our parents would usually walk into a store, buy once, and be done with, and we've turned it into a forever payment. I was even walking through Best Buy with my girlfriend, and I saw that a refrigerator had a monthly subscription on it. Now, this isn't a glitch, this is the model. Companies realized something huge. Selling you something once is nice, but billing you every month is way better for their pockets. So instead of saying, here's the product, buy it, they say, well, here's your monthly access. It's only $12, no big deal. And because each payment feels small, well, we as the consumer say yes over and over. And in the US, the average person now pays around 4 subscription services and spends roughly $200 to $250 a month on them. That's almost $3,000 a year just for access on different things. And a lot of that spending is being driven by younger people. Over 30% of Gen Z say they rely mainly on subscriptions for everyday needs, like entertainment, fitness, and even some food. And that's the part that gets me. You know, this is the trap. Individually, none of these subscriptions hurt, but together they become this quiet, consistent drain in our financial life. And you don't notice it until you scroll through your bank and you see 12 different little charges and think, wait, how much am I paying just to access this stuff? And if I cancel, it all goes away. That's not ownership, that's renting your life. This is truly how bad it's gotten. Think of a person that might fully get themselves enveloped in this type of lifestyle. First you have e-commerce. Someone might wake up to some organic coffee beans that they got through a monthly subscription box. I know we've all seen the YouTube ads. Then at 6:45, they might get on their Peloton bike where they pay a monthly subscription to join certain classes for a fitness bike. At 8 a.m., they might do ride sharing and pay for a premium Uber subscription. Or at 8:30, they're working on a cloud-based productivity app like Microsoft or Adobe. At 11:45, it's time to go to lunch, and instead of driving to lunch, they Uber Eats it, and let's say they pay a premium version to get lower delivery costs. At 6 p.m., they want to educate themselves, and they work on a cloud-based productivity educational app. And at 9 p.m., when it's time to relax after dinner, you might watch a documentary on YouTube or Netflix or Hulu, some type of streaming platform. And then when everything's said and done and it's time to go to bed, you're in the safety of your own home because you pay for a home security smart system that has a monthly fee. Or you might even track your sleep and your stress levels through a monthly subscription for a ring that you put on your finger. And this is the main problem. We have people that could potentially spend a whole day in the subscription economy. People who might spend every waking moment of their lives interacting with some type of monthly subscription based fee or service. In my opinion, this is something that went completely under the radar, and honestly, I didn't know how bad it got until I started doing research on it. So not only do we have this subscription economy that we live in, but now stack buy now, pay later on top of that. You have Klarna, Afterpay, Affirm, ShopPay. We see it all the time, quote unquote, those four easy payments of $24.99. I mean, that might be the most dangerous sentence on the internet right now. And now, I'm not saying nobody should ever use it. I'd be lying to you if I said I never used it. But for a lot of people, this isn't about just splitting a big purchase. It's turning your life, it turns into renting your lifestyle a couple weeks at a time. You're not paying to own things in a strong position. You're paying to feel like you can afford a version of your life that your bank account can't keep up with, can't actually support yet. And the wild part, when you split everything into tiny chunks, you stop feeling the real cost. One $90 purchase feels big, but four $22 payments, that feels like nothing, and it's interest free. But your brain doesn't throw the same red flag. So you say yes more often because you don't see the full picture. Just these harmless little, oh, it's $20 every 2 weeks or every 4 week moments. And those $20 moments, they really start to add up. And here's where the problem gets worse. People aren't just using buy now, pay later for sneakers or, basketball tickets anymore. Surveys show that about a quarter of buy now, pay later loans are now used for groceries, and Gen Z is the group most likely to use buy now, pay later just to eat and bridge the gap between paychecks. And because all those payments are small, people lose track. One study found that roughly 40% of buy now, pay later users have paid late in the last year, with Gen Z having some of the highest rates among those users. Groceries on buy now, pay later, clothes on buy now, pay later, flights on buy now, pay later. Suddenly, next month's paycheck is already carved up before it even hits your account. So we're living in a future with money from the past. And that's how people end up in this constant state of, I'm working, but I never really feel ahead. And it's not like a credit card bill where you see one ugly big number. It's a bunch of small, quote-unquote, friendly payments, but they affect you the same exact way. So you're stuck paying off last month while trying to survive this month. And again, that's not ownership. That's obligation dressed up in a nice user interface called Affirm. And here's where I've noticed some people like to throw blame at Gen Z. They'll say, kids these days don't want to commit. Kids these days, they don't want to buy homes or own cars. They don't want to try to. But the thing is, a lot of Gen Z would love to own stuff. I would love to own a house one day. I would love to own my car one day. But then you run the numbers, and a lot of people are very self-aware in this generation, and when the math doesn't math, well, they don't like to go through with it. And housing is the biggest example. Owning a home used to be like the core part of the American dream. You work hard, you save up, you buy a house, and you build equity. That was the story. But now for a lot of people, especially in their early to mid 20s, that dream feels like someone else's era, right? It doesn't feel like our generation anymore. You look at home prices, you look at your income, you look at the interest rates, and you realize I can either try to own and be broke and stressed, or I can rent and just kind of breathe a little easier. And same with cars. For a ton of people in the US, you need a car just to function. But now, more than often, that means a payment plus rising insurance, gas, repairs, and owning a car can easily stack over $1,000 a month. Not for something that appreciates either, not for something that pays you back, but for something that's a depreciating asset and loses value every single year. One recent survey showed that nearly half of Gen Z said home ownership feels so far out of reach that there's, quote, no point in even trying to save for it right now. And about a third said they have more debt than savings. Not only that, another analysis found that younger generations today face the worst income to housing price ratio in about 70 years because mortgage rates doubled from around 3% to around 6%. So think about it this way. Someone who could typically afford a $2,400 monthly payment went from being able to buy a $550,000 home to around a $360,000 home. So when older people say, well, why aren't you buying? The honest answer is, it's because the math looks insane. And that's not a mentality problem. It's a numbers problem. owning used to obviously be the best choice. Now it often looks like a long-term contract for financial stress. And another thing that I don't really see talked about a lot is convenience has completely rewired how we think about ownership. We grew up in a world where everything could be bypassed with an app on your phone. You need a ride, you call an Uber. You need food, you get a DoorDash. You need a song, you need a movie, a tutorial, a game, a class. Well, you probably go find it on YouTube. It's one tap away. So the default mindset becomes, why would I own the hassle when I can just tap for quick access? Why deal with car maintenance if Uber exists? Why keep shelves of DVDs and movies when I can just stream everything? Why buy expensive software outright when, it's just $20 a month? It's always going to be there to have the latest version. Convenience feels smart. It feels really efficient and it feels modern. But the trade-off is that you slowly give away control. Because when you don't own the thing, you don't set the rules. The company who sells you the thing does. They can raise prices at any time. They can change features at any time. They can decide what's included and what's not included, what's extra, what's not extra. They can cut access entirely if you miss one payment or break some tiny clause in their terms of service. And over time, you start to get used to this idea that everything in your life is someone else's decision. Access is never guaranteed, it's conditional. It exists as long as you keep paying and you keep playing by their rules. And the scary part is that spills over into how you feel about your actual life. If your tools are temporary, your housing is temporary, your job is temporary, your content is temporary, well, at that point, your life starts to feel temporary too. Like you're always in a holding pattern, a trial version, an access phase, even when you're doing everything right. So with all of this being said, who actually wins if we own nothing as a generation? So if more and more of us are renting everything, digital stuff, cars, homes, tools, groceries, technically in a way, who's actually benefiting? Because here's the thing, ownership has never disappeared, it's just moved. You might not own the song you're listening to because you're streaming it, but someone definitely owns the streaming platform. You might not own the apartment, but someone owns the building. You might not own the car, but someone owns the fleet and collects the subscription payment. You might not own your productivity tools, but some corporation always is going to get your monthly fee indefinitely. A world where the average person owns nothing is not a world with no owners. It's a world where ownership is concentrated at the top and everyone else just rents slices of it. And when you look at it from that angle, the own nothing and be happy quote doesn't sound like a prediction. It sounds like marketing. It sounds like the ideal scenario if you're a company that wants reliable, recurring revenue from a whole generation that was never able to build anything they own and never able to have enough equity to walk away. That doesn't mean we're victims with no power, but it does mean we have to be honest. The current setup is not designed for long-term ownership, especially your long-term ownership. It's designed for your long-term participation. And there's a big problem with this because there's an emotional cost of temporary everything. Let's step away from money for a second and talk about how this actually feels to live through. If everything in your life is temporary access, it becomes really hard to feel grounded. You rent the place you live at. You rent your car or you don't have one. You rent your tools. You rent your entertainment. You're bouncing between jobs, cities, subscriptions, plans. And even if you're technically okay, like you can pay your bills, you're not in crisis, there's this low-level feeling that nothing is solid and foundational. You're always one price increase, away from something bad happening, one layoff, one kind of rent spike, one algorithm change kind of away from things getting kind of scary. And over time, that uncertainty definitely wears on you. It becomes harder to plan long term. It becomes harder to commit. It becomes harder to think, this is my life, when everything feels borrowed and nothing is truly yours. So what happens is we naturally shrink our time horizon. You start thinking in months or weeks instead of years, paycheck to paycheck, not just financially, but mentally. You just aim to kind of get through the next little stretch. And that's not what real happiness looks like. You've heard people say, Let me just survive this month. Let me just get through this lease. Let me get through these last payments, you know? And that's not really own nothing and be happy. That's own nothing and stay busy enough to not think about it and not dwell on it, because it's just going to create kind of sadness in our lives. And one thing I want to say clearly is this isn't your fault. If you see any of yourself in this, it doesn't mean you're irresponsible or dumb with money. You know, you didn't design a world where housing shot up faster than wages. You didn't lobby for every product to become a subscription. You just kind of woke up in this system and we have to make it work. And this isn't about shaming anyone for having subscriptions or using buy now, pay later or renting an apartment. I do all of those things. This is about recognizing, oh wait, the game itself is kind of rigged towards me renting everything, and maybe I need to start playing a slightly different game if I want anything to truly be mine. And that shift right there, it's, you know, seeing the system clearly itself, that's where a lot of the power is going to start. And the good news is, own nothing is not your destiny. You know, I don't want this video to just pile on problems and then end. Because even though a lot of this is messed up, it's not hopeless. There are things that we can do, even if it's inside the system, to slowly move away from I rent everything towards I actually own pieces of my life. We might not be able to change housing policies tomorrow. We might not be able to stop every company from pushing subscriptions, but we can still choose what we prioritize in owning. You know, we can choose to own skills. We can choose to own assets, even if we start tiny. That might be broad index funds in a Roth IRA or a brokerage account. We can choose to own less but better instead of financing a bunch of random stuff. You know, we can chill on the impulse upgrades and focus on things that last. We can choose our own time, even if it's right now in only small pockets. That could look something like building a small emergency fund so one bad car repair doesn't nuke your whole finances for a month. It could be slowly increasing the gap between what you earn and what you spend so you're not consistently maxed out. And maybe the most important one is we can choose our own strategy, not just drifting from paycheck to paycheck, but actually sitting down and asking, where is my money going? Which subscriptions actually matter to me? Which payment plans are digging a hole? How much future me is getting every month? This doesn't mean becoming obsessed or never spending. It just means making sure some of what you work for is actually buying you freedom. So I choose not to fully buy into the idea of Gen Z is destined to own nothing and be happy, because I personally don't like that idea. What I do believe is Gen Z is the first generation that is really being forced to question what ownership actually is. We're realizing that owning a bunch of stuff doesn't automatically equal happiness. But we're also realizing that owning nothing doesn't feel like freedom either. The answer isn't to reject ownership completely or to chase it in the same way our parents did, but the answer is to own it differently. Own your skills, own assets, own fewer but better. Own your time, own your plan, own who you are and what you're building toward. We might not own everything, but we definitely don't have to own nothing. So we're not trying to hack our way out overnight. We're just trying to stack slowly and intentionally in a way that actually leads to a life that feels like it belongs to us. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys have a good day.